Today, part 3 in our Bitcoin series, how conflicts have been about control of the ledger, and Bitcoin changes that. Your host is Rick Falkvinger, and this is Liberties Report.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Good evening and welcome to Liberties Report Week 49, Part 3 in our 3-part series explaining why Bitcoin and the blockchain are so thoroughly disruptive. In Part 1, we looked at Bitcoin as such as a market meta-economy rather than a planned meta-economy, when the tokens that maintain the economy are themselves subjected to market forces. That gives such a meta-economy the same structural advantage as market versus planned has demonstrated in all other areas. And in Part 2, we looked closer at Bitcoin's underlying blockchain technology and how it can be used to maintain a ledger of public accounts, not just financial accounts, but any accounts, and how this will challenge the nation-state governments at their core business in pure market cost efficiency. We also observed that governments, having lost control of the financial ledger, will no longer be able to seize funds without the owner's cooperation, voluntary or forced, and what a game changer that is. And in this Part 3, we will take a closer look at just how central to power this concept of a ledger really is, and what profound effects it'll have when nobody is able to command and control it as they have been. When you abstract the concept of a ledger a bit and step away to see the big picture, you can see that it's about control. And most conflicts in humanity have really been about that particular control. Take land registry, for example, like we've discussed previously. Imagine for a moment that land registry is maintained on a blockchain. Who owns what plot of land, and that there's general consensus, even between nations, that this is the authoritative ledger. Imagine so much was built on this assumption that it was simply the holder of truth. Such a development, which is likely in the long term, has quite a few implications. For one, you would not see an abuse of the governmental court system by an interested party trying to seize land, say for fossil fuel extraction purposes. Courts would not have authority over the blockchain, or at least not the authority they hold today, as blockchain technology does not lend itself to chaining ownership of a token by somebody else than that token's previous owner. But it goes far, far beyond mere courts. Remember how we established that control of the ledger was crucial to power. Most conflicts have been about not just control of a particular ledger, but conflicts about which ledger to use, and this is important. In the past, when a country invaded a neighbor, that government's ledgers became null and void overnight as a new government was established with blank ledgers, or, more commonly, ledgers filled in already to benefit the invading nation and its citizens, rather than whomever the previous government supported as rightful owner. Thus, we can observe that most conflicts, from the small neighborhoodly all the way up to wars among nations, can be described as control of the ledger, fights over what's in the ledger, and, larger scale, even what ledger to use. Now then, imagine what happens when the ledger does not lend itself anymore to being controlled by force or threat of force as it is today, due to a fundamentally changed nature when it is a shared agreement like a language, and that agreement has so much else built on top of it that you just can't yank that agreement away, as we observed before. The consequence of that is that a plot of land doesn't change owner, because your belligerent neighbor parks a squadron of tanks on that plot of land. Warfare as we know it, using violence to fight over which ledger to use, becomes not cost efficient. And just for the record, by the way, warfare has almost always been about financial advantage or resource advantage. Demonizing the enemy, using religion, using whatever have you, has been the scapegoat and the superficial reason to convince teenagers to go out and die. It's when these pieces fall into place that you start to realize the scale of the long-term consequences of Bitcoin technology. It's hard to see really disruptive technologies for how they can be used to their potential. The generation inventing a new technology tend to be restricted in their mindset to seeing what thing of old the new technology replaces, rather than seeing the new technology on its own merits. It's usually the next generation, the people who grew up without even seeing the thing of old, that take full advantage of the new technology. Sometimes even the generation after that, as was the case with electricity, for example. When the internet arrived at scale, there were people who were expressing concerns it might replace the fax machine. You know, the internet turned out to be a little more than that once it was seen on its own merits, rather than on the merits of what it replaced. When Bitcoin arrived, it was seen as a better banking system and a cheaper credit card. It has the potential to be a little more than that once it is seen on its own merits, rather than what it's replacing. And yet, the things mentioned so far in this short series, self-arbitrating contracts that are replacing courts, even replacing wars, that's just technologies that are in the pipeline already. These technologies are the internet technology equivalents of 1992. And this is the promise of Bitcoin technology, or even a small part of the promise of Bitcoin technology. It goes far, far beyond being a simpler and cheaper credit card. I'm Rick Falkvinge and this is Liberties Report. Visit our sponsor, Private Internet Access. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.